Alright, so let's begin. We did everything in our sample scene. We've got a camera. Just has a black background. Nothing special. We just added an audio listener as well. Because we wanted to be able to play music. We've got our center object, which I don't think... Which one is this? Is this... Oh yeah, it's the middle sphere that we have. It doesn't need this collider or the rigid body, but that's okay. And it has the halo, which gives this effect of light going out. Oh, it's actually just that one. All right. Yeah, so that internal effect. So this is the thing that can spawn enemies. So we've got the enemy prefab. Let's find that. Which is this object. So that's going to be the enemy that's going to show up in the middle, and it uses the pyramid shape script to generate how it looks, and it has an enemy puppet script and a bullet. So I guess we can start looking at how some of these things are done. So the pyramid shape, it basically sets a custom mesh based on points and just draws a pyramid shape, which is what we wanted. So yeah, so we basically just set the points, and then if we don't have a mesh yet, we create one. This should always happen, by the way. We clear whatever was there. We set our vertices, we create our triangles based on those points. So these numbers correspond to the indices of these vertices. And yeah, and then we need to do some UV mapping so it looks alright. Nothing special. It's just where things are pointed at. And that's it. That creates the pyramid in code. So the enemy puppet, basically what it does, I notice now that the code is not fully cleaned up because we don't even use this anymore. So basically this is the expanding, I think. So we start with it small, invisible, so to speak, and then it starts to scale up as time goes by, which gives that effect of it growing. Then what we do, so this is a different option that we have. So we can either have a certain rotation speed that we're rotating. So those are the enemies that are going to be spawned around this circle, and they can rotate. And they can have a positive rotation speed or a negative rotation speed. But we also have a way of getting them into certain positions. So basically, yeah, we've got that rotation speed. We also got a fire bullet rate. So this is how often it will fire a bullet. So we got this block for that. That's when it's gonna fire next. And we've got a target angle with a target time. So this is when we want it to go from one spot to another spot. And we do that because when we're creating the patterns, we'll sometimes want to get one enemy here and the other one on top, for instance, or have them spaced equally between them. So if we have 3 or if we have 4 and so on. So we do that using this target angle. And it does a bit of a weird position. You can see it right there. Yeah. What else is there in this code? Oh, we always keep the angle within the bounds that we want from 0 to 360. This takes care of the rotation, and this will take care of the position. Yeah. And so when we are doing one of these movements, so when we tell the enemy go to this spot, we obviously want to ignore the normal rotation that we do using the angle and that position. That's why we have this skip pause variable right there. Right, I think that's all there is to this piece of code. And we also obviously fired the bullets. So we instantiate a bullet and we set a position that's according to the position of that enemy and then the angle that we're pointing at. So it starts in the right place. And we set its direction as well. Okay. So this bullet that we have here, it basically is just a sphere. We render it. We've got a script which we're going to take a look at in a second, and it has a halo effect as well, which you can see right there. So that bullet, what it does is, as we've seen, it has a certain direction, and that's the direction it's going to move towards. It needs to know about the player, the center object, and the survival time, and we're going to see why in a second. So if it has a direction to go to, we update our position according to that direction, and we have a bullet speed and a time. So this is the time between frames, so we get a constant speed even if the frame rate changes. We also calculate the distance to the player and the distance to the center. And we're gonna need these two to find out if we have the bullet has hit the player. So instead of raycasting to the player, we're not doing that. And there is a reason for that. So what can happen? So this is the case where it hits the player. The distance is less than the hit distance, so this represents distance between the bullet and the player. And the distance to the center is less than the one that the player has. So that means that if as the player rotates, it hits a bullet in the back, we don't trigger that. And that just makes the experience a bit nicer. Not as realistic probably, but nicer. So if I haven't hit before, this starts as false, and we're still in a time scale of 1, because what we're going to do is we're going to slow down time when you get hit. Then we slow down time. We set as having hit. We have a particle system that we can take a look in a second. So I think that's going to do a small explosion. We play that, and then we tell the player to start the death animation. The main object, we say, well, it's game over. And we also stop the time. So that's what this bit does. We also then destroy some of the, we destroy the pause button. As for the background fade, when you get hit and it's game over, there's a wide overlay that fades in. That's what this does. And we stop the music. And then we say, oh, I only want this to happen for this amount of time. And we need to be careful about this amount of time because it's at this scale. So this is actually 0.75 seconds. Okay, so that is when you get hit. When enough time has passed, we say, oh, it's over. We need to get back to a normal position, a normal time scale. We need to stop the explosion. And yeah, we're pretty much done. This bit is to self-destruct the bullet when it gets off bounds, so it's no longer seen on the screen. It's no longer visible. We need to destroy it because it's another object that we have on the screen as well. And these are, I basically just tested the limits to see where the bullet was sufficiently away that we couldn't see it anymore. Alright, so that's the bullet. And we've also seen the enemy prefab. So this is the big script, the game master. I think I'm gonna leave that for a bit later for now. So we got the player. The player has the pyramid shape that we had also for the enemies. And it also has a player script. So this is what takes care of the input and the position of the player in the game. Okay, so basically when we start off, we're still in the alive state. So this dummy mode, I'm not going to go over this dummy mode. This is used for the main menu. It just randomly does actions. It just randomly goes right to left. So yeah, we're just going to ignore it. And then it's just a matter of typing the inputs and calling the right methods. We've created move left and move right. So these two are for when we were testing on our keyboard, so just the left key and the right key. We also have touch controls. So we have when you're sufficiently on the left side of the screen and sufficiently on the right side of the screen. And then we got a return to neutral. We're going to see what that does in a minute. So we keep the angle in the bounds. This is similar to the other case where we kept it between the values that we wanted, which should be from 0 to 360. And then we set the position of the player based on that angle that we've calculated, and we've got a certain rotation as well on it. if we're not alive, then we need to see how far we're in the death animation. So basically what happens is when you die, you start rotating and you start moving towards the center, and this is where this object is. So you basically get destroyed and you go inside this. Right, so very simple. Move left and move right. You just change the angle. We've got two angles, as you can see. The M angle represents the angle from which is the position of your player in this circle. Okay? And the other angle that we have, the self-rotation angle, is the angle that we give to the player object to make it seem like it's moving left or right. So it tilts left or it tilts right, depending on the movement you're doing. So keeping angles in bounds, it just sets the self-rotation angle within the limits it needs to, and makes sure that the other angle is within the 0 to 360. Returning to neutral means that basically when we're tilting and stop pressing anything, we want it to go back to an horizontal position. And that's what this little block does. Start death animation, it just very simple. It sets some angle with some random number for how fast it rotates. Yeah, it just sets your initial position, how long the animation will take, and you're no longer alive in that case. Alright, so event system. I don't think we use this for anything. Don't know why we have it. Yeah, I don't think we use it for anything. I think it's something that was there by default. We can get rid of it. Right, so we've added a canvas for the menus. These settings can be important to get the right scale. We've got a survival time. So this script is the one that we called game over on. So when it starts, it sets the text as all zeros. While the player is alive, that increases according to the time between frames. This just does the parsing to make sure that it looks alright. With a new high score message as well, if that's the case. So you get the high score from the player prefs. So basically, if at any point it's over the high score, but not, so we don't want this message to stay there because it looks a bit bad if it does. So basically we have it for 4 seconds and then it goes away. What else? Oh, and this is when you die. Yeah, when you die, we want it to show again if it's a new high score. So basically, when you die, if it's over your current high score, we do a couple of things. We set your new high score, and we upload to the leaderboards. and if it's greater than a certain value, we also post an achievement. So these are codes that you would get on your Google Play Store or Google Developer account. Yeah. So the pause button, it just calls the toggle pause in Game Master. We're gonna look at that in detail. I know what this game over is. Might be some text that shows up when you die. Oh yeah. Alright, it's the whole menu. It's the whole thing. Oh, yeah, on the pause button, we have a text for the pause and play. So this is a canvas group, maybe? I think that's what it's called. Oh yeah, canvas group, yeah. So basically it has the buttons for restart, show leaderboard, and exit to main menu. Just call methods on the Game Master script, and that's just a text. And same for this: load main menu and show leaderboard. Gonna be show leaderboard again in Game Master. All right, and then we have the music, which calls the audio controller, toggle audio. So that's in the music controller, which we're gonna see in a second. And that's just a text on or off. Yep. So if we go to that, basically we have our song here. It's an audio source. It's placed on top of the camera. The camera has the audio listener. And this is the text for this button. Our audio controller basically checks what we had in the settings from our previous use. We toggle it, update text, and when we basically when we toggle the audio, we just change the mute state, and then of course update the settings to make sure that the next time you play, it remembers if the music was on or off. All right, so the background fade, very simple script. All it does is do a fading effect. So when you die, when you're playing, it looks like that. It's more clear, and then when you die, it looks like this. So it's semi-transparent. I think it's black actually. I thought it was white. Semi-transparent material. So yeah, we get the material. We get its. We set the color to be the start color, which is fully black, and the end color is going to be 50% black. Initially, so basically when game over gets called, it starts an animation, which is done in this update. So if you're not alive, if we're still fading in, we change the color, and you can actually lerp, which is very nice. And yeah, it also changes the alpha on the buttons from this game over. And yeah, when we're done, everything becomes interactable. So that's this bit. So it changes this alpha and makes sure that these buttons are interactable. All right. So what else do we have? So this is the halo effect, right there. So this is how it looks without it. This is how it looks with it. We also have a particle system for the stars. Don't sure. That doesn't look like I can make it play in the editor. But that's okay. And we've got a background manager. So this changes the color of the background from time to time. So it sets a certain color, and when it's going to transition next, so it's going to transition after 10 seconds. So when that happens, basically, if we're not already changing a color, we set a new color, and we say we're going to change colors, we're going to pick a new color, and that transition starts at that time. So if we're changing color, we start and we do a lerp. And that also changes the color on the light. Is it only that changes, actually? I think it might be. Yeah, I think it changes the color of the stars and the color of the light. But yeah, nothing too special, I don't think. Alright, so the most problematic one, I would say, is this game master script. This is a very big script. Yeah, it's too big. I ended up adding too much logic here. So this initial bit, it just represents the state that we're in the game in regards to the enemies. They can be idle. We have the single pattern 1, which is just moving one direction. We can be adding a new enemy. And then these are shared between them. Can't remember what this one is. We're gonna see in a second. And then they can move in the same direction in all sorts of ways. And then they can move in opposite directions. This is just for 2 units. When we have 3 units, we've got we've got descriptions, which is good. First one moves in one direction, the others in the other direction, and so on. Yeah, so these are patterns for 3 units, and then we end up going into these. Alright, so this is the enemy prefab. We keep a list of all the enemy objects. We start in a idle state. And this is when we start phase 2, 3, and so on. So that's when we spawn new enemies. This is the minimum angle that we want between 2 enemies. Yeah, we're gonna see how we use the other variables as we go. So when we start, we set the time scale to be 1. We want to reset that. We create a new enemy and add it to our list. Yeah. And the next time we're going to do something is going to be in a second. Okay, so this wouldn't look so bad, right? If the game is still running and we're live, if we went on to the next transition time, then we pick a new transition. Otherwise, No, not even otherwise. We're always going to do this if we're alive. We're going to handle the current state we're in. Otherwise, we can be in a game over state. So this game over state just means that the enemies stop rotating and they stop firing bullets. Okay? So that was simple. So handling the current state. So while this file is quite long, it doesn't have a lot of difficult things, I don't think. And there's a lot of repetition in terms of how these patterns work. Yeah, so basically depending on the state we're in, we're just gonna call all sorts of different methods. Which we're gonna see one by one in a second. And we also have the transition to the next state. So ignore these. These are achievements as you basically as you get to new states, an achievement pops up, and that's what those lines do. I've replaced the specific codes that are in the game in the Play Store with progress code. So when we're adding enemies, and if you look inside, these are all very similar. We just set the state to be adding enemy, and we say the next transition is going to happen in 3 seconds. So yeah, and then depending on the number of enemies that we have different patterns that we can go to, so different states. If we're adding enemies, then the next stage is going to be, we're going to be idle. We're going to be idle between 1 to 2.5 seconds. We're going to create the enemy. We're going to set its position based on the positions of the enemies. We're going to add it to our list. And yeah, we're going to call this, which you're going to see in a while what it does. So these are, so what happened while I was developing this is that I've split many of the patterns into 2 sets. So we had the first part and the second part of a pattern. So basically what happens is these will pick the first part of a state, and when that gets to an end, we're gonna pick the second part of the state. So they all depend on the number of enemies you have on the screen. That's why it says second phase, and these are the first phase always. Yeah, the amount of time we stay idle depends on the enemy count. It's not very important. It just means that you get a higher difficulty as time progresses. So basically we've got all the different patterns. Single pattern 1, it's just moving one direction. We need to decide which direction it is, because you can move one way counterclockwise or clockwise, and that's just the speed modifier. And then there's a fire rate modifier, which is completely random and could be extracted. It's not part of the if else. So when we have a single enemy, it can fire a lot more because it's fine. You have loads of time to avoid the bullets. So this is going to be the first phase with 2 enemies. Yeah, so these spread states, let me just quickly show what they do. So what this spread means, it means redistributing the enemies around the middle object. And we can do it in all sorts of different ways, depending on the number of enemies that you have. So first of all, we make sure that they don't fire bullets. And then basically they can have certain distances between them. We pick one of them to be our, we pick a certain angle to be our reference angle. We're going to set the position of 1 to that. And the other one is going to be a variation of it. So for instance, these two cases, they're actually the same. They shouldn't be separate. They're just, one is in one corner, the other one is in the opposite corner. And we do the same for 3 enemies, 4 enemies, 5 enemies, 6 enemies, 7 enemies, 8 enemies. So you can see why the code starts to grow. When we get to something like 7 enemies, we can basically have scenarios where they're all tucked in together in one side, for instance, which does give a bit of variation. Alright, so all this is doing for all of these cases is, first of all, it decides, am I going to call the spread again or not? And if we do, then we can only call it again after 10 seconds. So this is to avoid them constantly just moving around and not firing bullets. And you'll see that they all have this in their first phase. I think it's a first phase exclusive. Yeah, otherwise we're just gonna pick a state according to what we want and set appropriate fire and speed values. So that's what they are all doing. And the second phase, pretty much the same, but it sets different states. But then when it's over, it's gonna go to an idle state. Yeah. These are all variations on it. Alright, so we've done the game over. When the enemies are idle, we don't want them to fire, so we set the fire rate to be 0. And then basically we have patterns. Nothing too special. We already have the script in the list, so we just need to set the rotation speed and the fire bullet according to the pattern we want to do. We don't want them to be firing at the same rate all the time. We want some variation on that, so we add that as well. Oh, what have I done? I think I jumped. So when we add the enemies, we want them to be spread around equally. So that's what this does, pretty much. So this is the bit we saw before, doing the different variations on the spread. You also have moving the same direction, moving opposite directions. This should all be reasonably simple. I've reused the same methods and passed it true or false to know if we're in the first half or second half of the movement. Yeah, just try to reuse some of the code. No. Where were we? Right, so we got the other patterns, triple pattern. check enemy proximity. So this is to make sure that the enemies don't get too close to each other. So if we have a certain movement, for instance, where they start 180 degrees and they're moving in the same direction, I don't want them to cross. So if I detect that the angle between them, between any two of them, is less than the minimum angle that we set, then we just skip to the next phase. Yeah, so this is to make sure that they're going in opposite directions. So they're if they are already close, they're going to be even closer. Can't remember what this is used. Oh, it's for the triple pattern specifically. Okay, it makes sense because it does a bit of a weird movement. All right, so game over. There's an achievement for game over. Doesn't matter too much. And we've got the other random methods that get called. Got toggle pause. Basically sets the time scale to be 0 and changes the text to be this arrow. And yeah, it puts it back to what it was. So this is used in the main menu, and this is used when you restart. And this is just loading the main menu. Yeah, again, should be fine. This is just controlling how often you'll see an ad. I believe you get it every 5 attempts, something like that. Yeah. Okay. So how is the game in the end? So basically we have this. Yeah, so you can see the background starts to change color. The enemy fires the bullets at different speeds. When you move left and right, you get that sort of movement, that rotation, that tilt that I was talking about. And we've got the enemies doing all sorts of different patterns. Yeah, so when a new enemy is added, they start out spread like that, but then they can do all sorts of different patterns. Yeah, as you can see, this was another instance of the spread code that just put them together, because you can get a nice little effect like that. So at this point, I wasn't in the best position, obviously, but I still made it. I think it's not too bad to get to 4 or even 5 enemies, but then it starts to get really tough. Oh, this is actually a new high score. Okay. Yeah. I think I'm doing quite alright. So being Unity, you can just compile this to Android, which I've done. And this is actually in the Play Store if you want to try it. Alright, I made it all the way to a pattern of 5. Just curious to see how far I can go. I almost died there. Yeah, you'll get quite a few nice patterns with this. Of course, you can create your own. It is also a lot more difficult on playing on a mobile phone, from my experience. It was also very important to keep the game as fair as possible. So making sure that while it is difficult, that there's never a case where you can't survive, because that would be quite frustrating for the player. The maximum amount of enemies you can get is 8, and at that point there's not a lot of movement variation that you can do without them getting on top of each other. That's why I decided 8 was as much as what I was going to do. I died. Alright, so you saw that slow motion effect, and then it goes to the middle. Yeah. So this is bullet hell.